Hello and welcome back to Botcrim. I'm Tim Jakes, I'm Botcrim's founder. We recommend that every youth-serving organisation supplements a compliance-based approach to protecting minors and vulnerable adults from sexual abuse and misconduct, and that they supplement compliance with risk management best practices. A few days ago I was talking to someone and they said, you say supplement compliance with risk management best practices, but what does that look like and what difference is it going to make to child safety? I'm going to try and answer both of those questions in this video. Let's start by getting our terms right. We're talking about supplementing compliance, not replacing it. Just to remind you of what compliance is made up of 4 controls. It's criminal background checks, mandatory SAM-related training, it's policies and procedures around one-to-one interactions, and it's mandatory reporting of suspicions of SAM. All 4 of those controls are important, they're valuable, they contribute to child safety, and there's no suggestion at all that organisations should stop using them. That's not the point. The point is that on their own, they're not enough to protect minors and vulnerable adults from sexual abuse, and they do nothing, effectively, to protect organisations from the consequences of failing to prevent SAM, and the tools that they're given in compliance are not enough to prevent SAM, so they've got they're in a vicious cycle. The tools they're given aren't good enough, and they've got no protection when they fail. And so what ERM is designed to do, and its risk management best practices, is to create a systematic approach that enables organisations to protect minors and vulnerable adults as well as the organisation possibly can. It's up to the organisation whether it does that, but it is able to. And then it also enables, once you've built the foundation of protecting minors and vulnerable adults as well as possible, it allows you to build another level on top of that, which enables the organisation to protect itself from the consequences of failing to prevent SAM. ERM is, that's the abbreviation, it's an approach called enterprise-wide risk management. And the point I'm going to make as we go through the description of the difference between compliance and ERM is that ERM goes an awful lot further than simply protecting minors and vulnerable adults well and protecting the organisations that look after minors and vulnerable adults well. And you'll see that as we go through this. So let's just compare these 2 approaches. Compliance is a set of minimum standards, and I call them minimum standards for a very good reason. There's the whole convoy problem that a compliance-based approach has, or at least that regulators have when they design a compliance framework. A convoy has the problem that it can only go as fast as its slowest participant. A regulator has the problem that it can only impose rules that are sophisticated enough for the least sophisticated of the organisations that are going to use those rules. And so compliance-based standards are by their nature, because they have to cover such a broad array of different organisations with very different resource levels, very different experience levels, expertise levels, and all the rest. And so they end up being minimum standards for almost all organisations. And what regulators normally hope and expect is that in most compliance-based frameworks, most organisations will automatically supplement the compliance requirements with further practices. The problem with something like sexual abuse and misconduct is that there's a couple of challenges with it. The first is that it's a subject that nobody likes to talk about much or even think about. We don't like to think about what causes it. We don't like to think about what it is when it actually happens. We don't like to think about the consequences of it. And so we're asked to comply with some controls and we go, okay, yep, we'll do that. And we can then do the controls without actually thinking too much about the underlying thing that we're trying to prevent. And the problem with any risk is that it must be engaged with. You cannot manage a risk without engaging with it. And a compliance-based approach enables the opposite of that with something like SAM risk, where we just don't want to have to think about it. ERM, I'm afraid, will force you to think about SAM and SAM risk, but that means you'll then engage with it and you'll figure out how to prevent it effectively, not simply by using a set of compliance-based tools that inevitably become a checkbox approach because they enable you to separate your thinking from the underlying issues and the way that you're being asked to try to prevent it. Secondly is that there are only the 4 controls. If you're going to provide comprehensive child protection, there's at least another 25 controls that you could use. You don't have to use any of them, but there are plenty of other controls that you could use. If you look just at intake, for example, the compliance-based controls require you to do criminal background checks. They don't talk about interview techniques, application forms, reference checks, and all the other things that you'd have to go through if you were going to get a job flipping burgers, never mind looking after minors and vulnerable adults. It's ridiculous that the compliance-based framework designed to protect children has so little in terms of intake in it. Now, that also brings up another issue. A lot of organisations will be doing a lot of the additional controls, will be performing a lot of the additional controls that we're going to be talking about in an ERM approach. It's not that all of these things are going to be dramatically new. The question, though, is not every organisation is doing all of these things. Sometimes they're doing them for full-time employees but not for volunteers, for example, and other times they're just not doing all of these different things. And for a lot of organisations, they're not optimising them for SAM. And that's clearly an issue, because if you have a set of interview questions, are they interview questions that have been designed to help you make good decisions about whether you should employ somebody from a SAM perspective? So that's what we're talking about, making sure that that you use the right controls and that you use them in the right ways. It's not just that you do certain things, it's how you do them as well. After you've got a comprehensive set of controls, ERM will also introduce a comprehensive set of activities above the controls that ensure that the controls actually get performed, that you monitor their performance, that you adapt the performance and improve it where you can. It's no good to have a bunch of controls if you're not verifying that they're doing what you intended them to do and adapting them to make sure that they keep doing what you need them to do. And also that you're recording everything so that you create the defensibility that's a part of protecting the organisation. So ERM will deliver comprehensive controls and comprehensive activities to make sure those controls are actually happening. I've already hinted at this. People just don't like talking about SAM. They don't even like thinking about it. The point about ERM is that it enables organisations to accommodate cognitive biases. I'm not going to go into details here about how ERM does it, but it's for example, I will just very briefly, having said that, there are various behaviour requirements and expectations that you can have of people, and the point isn't that you have certain kinds of behaviour guidelines and expectations. What they are is less important than the fact that you have activities that support them, that ensure that when there is a breach of a particular type of behaviour requirement or expectation, actions are taken regardless of any thought about whether it's led to or is part of or is a cause of or whatever else it's related to SAM. We're trying to make sure that if something that is proven to be, for example, grooming behaviour takes place, it doesn't matter whether there is SAM or whether somebody suspects that SAM is happening or not. We try and create a response that ensures that the behaviour doesn't carry on and that the behaviour is looked at closely without necessarily having to alert everybody about the suspicion of SAM and triggering those other aspects that make SAM risk management much more difficult because of the cognitive bias issues. I may or may not have explained that very clearly. If I've confused there, let me know and I'll go into that in more detail. The point is ERM accommodates cognitive biases. It doesn't ignore them. Which a compliance-based approach absolutely does. Another issue that ERM delivers is the ability to customize a system. For example, if I go and play pickleball down the road on a Sunday morning, the pickleball club there will have a certain amount of SAM risk, and it will have probably some requirements around the way it manages its SAM risk to the extent that it's training kids how to play pickleball. Or vulnerable adults, and anybody can be vulnerable. Somebody with a head injury can be vulnerable to SAM, for example. But the point is that pickleball club is going to need to manage SAM risk very differently to Harvard University, for example. completely different types of SAM risk, completely different levels of SAM risk, completely different type of organisation, completely different types of resources, and all of those other things that mean that it's, as it stands at the moment, the compliance-based frameworks for both organisations are, broadly speaking, the same, which is completely ridiculous because the two organisations couldn't be more different in every aspect that matters in terms of SAM risk management or child protection. And so it's absolutely essential that a SAM risk management system is customised to the organisation and to its risks. Risk is also dynamic. So are organisations. So are best practices. So are the environments in which all of those things operate. Unless risk management is also dynamic and constantly adapting to changes that are identified, that you go out and look for, or at least make sure that you recognise as quickly as possible when they happen, your risk management is very rapidly going to deteriorate. One of the biggest challenges with a compliance-based approach is that the core framework with the 4 controls was first developed 20 years ago. And it cannot be right that that remains best practice today when risk management best practice has moved on so far, even in the last 10 years, never mind 20 years. So having a sense of dynamism to risk management is absolutely foundational to successful SAM risk management. The worst kept secret about sexual abuse and misconduct risk management is that we don't honestly know what the most effective practices are for preventing SAM. We suspect it's the 4 controls. That's why they are part of the compliance-based framework. But because other practices haven't ever been measured, and because risk and its management and its performance have never been measured in the aggregate, and with a view to thinking in ERM terms, with all of the other things that organisations can do, there has never been effective measurement of SAM risk management performance. And that means we haven't been able to continuously improve. That's why we're still basically using the same 4 controls that we've always used, or at least for 20 years, and that makes no sense at all. We have to introduce a mechanism, and ERM is it, that enables risk management performance to be measured in a broad sense so that all of the different approaches that we could potentially use get incubated, and SAM risk management gets incubated so that we can start to think about, okay, which practices are really the most effective, which practices can we drop, what new practices that we're not using today are actually much more effective than some of the existing practices, and how do we create a sense that here is a whole range of different things. Some of them are effective over here to this type of organisation, some are effective to this type of organisation, and so on. And we end up with an approach to SAM risk management that is data-driven and enables us to identify which are genuinely the most effective practices. ERM delivers that ability, and compliance simply doesn't. I should say before I go on, I don't want that to sound like maybe even by saying this, I'm going to make this worse. There are organisations that do a huge amount of good work trying to improve the 4 controls. They're using various forms of analysis, particularly root cause analysis, to try to identify better ways of enhancing and refining the 4 controls. What they're not looking at is all the other things that could potentially be added to that scheme. And they're using analytical approaches that I'll talk about in another video that aren't as effective as we need to improve SAM risk management at the speed it needs to be improved to stop SAM from rising. We need to first of all slow it down, then stop it, and then reduce it to eliminate it altogether. That's our objective. It's not acceptable to say we want to actually slow it down a bit. We actually want to stop it altogether. ERM is designed to help organisations earn the trust of their stakeholders. I can't stress this too importantly. The idea of the stakeholder consultation element of enterprise-wide risk management is that the organisation goes out, meets with its most important stakeholders, finds out what their main SAM-related concerns are and what their expectations are, decides whether and how, and if yes, how it's going to try and meet those expectations, and then regularly reports back on how it's doing. and over time, therefore, is able to earn the trust of its stakeholders. You can't build trust, you can't buy it, you have to earn it. And the only way you can earn it, let's just separate this into two issues. The first is that trust is a major problem as far as SAM risk management is concerned. All of the scandals that we've seen have led most people to believe that children are not as well protected as they should be. It's left some organisations with horribly damaged reputations and questionable whether they'll ever recover. All youth-serving organisations need to earn the trust of all of their stakeholders, because that's the way they will be most likely to achieve their own objectives. If they don't have good relations with the people that matter to them most, they simply can't achieve the bigger objectives that they want to achieve. So earning trust is absolutely foundational. ERM is the way in which you earn trust, and it has a mechanism that helps you go out and earn it. So it gives you the framework for going and having the conversations with stakeholders. Here's what we're trying to do, and it also gives you the information to share with them about how you are meeting their expectations. So, for example, at a very crude level, you can sit down and say, we are using risk management best practices, which is a process called ERM, which ensures that we've assessed our risk, we understand what it is, we've designed controls to prevent SAM as much as possible, we have activities in place that are designed to protect our organisation as much as possible, and here's how we constantly monitor how we're doing and constantly improve it. And here's the improvement that we've delivered this quarter or this half or this year. And you keep coming back and you say, here's how we've improved, and here's how we've improved, and here's how we've improved, and you show it against peers, you can now start earning trust in a way that is simply not possible with compliance. If you turn around to somebody and say, I'm complying with what I'm told to do, they're going to go, whoop-de-doo, what does that mean? If anybody knows what compliance means, and it means using minimum standards, they know that you've actually just not deserved any trust at all. Certainly not in a position to earn trust. The last point is the most unusual one, and not one perhaps you expect to see here. Trust in traditional terms, sorry, I beg your pardon, risk in traditional terms is the idea of the potential for loss. There is a hurricane, it blows your house down. That's what traditional risk is, and risk management is about trying to make sure that doesn't happen. ERM is a completely different framework, and it comes from a completely different perspective, and I'm not going to go into the theoretical underpinnings for it. Suffice it to say that in ERM, risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on objectives. In other words, what ERM is designed to do is to help an organisation meet its own objectives. So it completely changes the thinking in terms of compliance is designed to prevent negative events. That's it. ERM is designed to help you meet your own objectives. It does that in part by making sure that if you have negative events, it makes sure that they're much less likely to happen, and that if they happen, they are much less expensive than they would otherwise be. But organisations that use ERM, compared to organisations that manage risk traditionally, they have fewer and less expensive negative events. They achieve their objectives more often. They are more trusted by their stakeholders, and in the case of public companies, they're more highly valued by their stockholders. This is all based on research that you can look into that talks about the difference between the organisations using the most sophisticated forms of risk management, which is ERM, and organisations using traditional risk management, which is quite a few steps up from compliance. So ERM delivers a fundamentally different approach that's designed to provide comprehensive child protection and comprehensive protection for the organisation, at the same time as making it more likely the organisation will earn the trust of all of its stakeholders and meet its own objectives. That's what BOCRIM helps to deliver to you, an ability to use enterprise-wide risk management to protect the children and vulnerable adults in your care. I hope this has been helpful. If you'd like more videos on SAM risk management best practices, please hit subscribe at the end of this video. Thank you very much.